Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to drift away to the prodigal son, a father's waiting and a son's return? Welcome to Easy Drift Sleep. Tonight we find out, one quiet detail at a time. If these stories bring you peace, a quick subscribe means we can keep making them for you. Now settle in, slow your breathing, and let your mind wander. The late afternoon sun, a soft, honeyed gold, began its slow descent over the rolling hills of Judea, casting long, gentle shadows across the ancient olive groves that dotted the landscape, their gnarled branches reaching like old men's arms towards the fading light. A faint, earthy scent of sun-baked dust mingled with the sweet, dry fragrance of wild thyme and distant wood smoke, carried on a breeze that barely stirred the leaves, whispering secrets through the vineyards where the grapes, still green and firm, promised a future harvest. From a small, prosperous farmstead nestled comfortably on a gentle slope, the distant bleating of sheep returning to their pens for the night could be heard, a quiet, rhythmic sound that blended with the contented cooing of doves settling in the eaves of the stone farmhouse and the almost imperceptible hum of insects beginning their evening chorus. Inside, the air was still and warm, holding the day's heat, but a sense of quiet expectation, like the hush before a summer rain, seemed to settle over the dwelling as the light softened further, painting the rough-hewn stone walls with shades of amber and rose. In this home lived a man of some means, a patriarch whose days were filled with the steady rhythms of agricultural life, overseeing his fields, his flocks, his servants, and the well-being of his family. He was a man accustomed to the predictable cycles of nature and the comforting routines of his household, a life built on generations of careful stewardship and a deep connection to the land that sustained them. He had 2 sons, both grown, both part of the fabric of this life, though in different ways. The elder son, diligent and steadfast, worked alongside his father, learning the intricacies of farming, the wisdom of the seasons, the responsibilities of management, his hands calloused and strong from honest labor, his gaze often fixed on the horizon, planning for the next planting, the next harvest. He was a son who understood the value of tradition, the weight of expectation, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived in harmony with the earth. The younger son, however, possessed a different spirit, one that chafed against the familiar boundaries of their village and the well-worn paths of their family farm. His eyes, though they saw the same fields and olive trees, seemed to look beyond them, imagining distant cities, bustling markets, and experiences far removed from the quiet predictability of their rural existence. He would often sit on the low stone wall overlooking the valley, watching the occasional traveler pass by on the dusty road, his mind painting vivid pictures of the world that lay beyond the familiar hills, a world he longed to explore, to taste, to truly leave within. His heart, young and restless, yearned for something more, something undefined but powerfully alluring, a freedom he felt was denied by the very comfort and security of his home. One afternoon, as the sun was at its zenith, casting sharp, clear shadows and bathing the courtyard in a brilliant, almost blinding light, the younger son approached his father. The air was thick with the scent of sun-warmed stone and the faint, sweet perfume of jasmine blooming by the well. The usual sounds of the farm to the distant lowing of cattle, the rhythmic thud of a pestle in a mortar from the kitchen, the chirping of sparrows to seem to recede, leaving a quiet tension in the space between them. His voice, though respectful, carried an uncharacteristic firmness, a determined edge that his father had not heard before. He asked for something that, in their culture, was almost unthinkable, a request that would have sent a ripple of quiet shock through any family gathered within earshot. "Father," he began, his gaze steady, though perhaps a flicker of apprehension danced in his young eyes, "I wish for you to give me the share of property that falls to me." The words hung in the still air, heavy and unexpected. In their society, an inheritance was typically divided and distributed only upon the father's death. To ask for it while the father was still alive was, in essence, to wish him dead, to sever the deep, organic ties that bound a son to his family and to the land that was their legacy. It was a profound rejection of his father's continued life and authority, a declaration of independence that bordered on insolence, though perhaps not intended as such. It was simply a young man's desperate plea for autonomy, for the means to forge his own path, unburdened by the expectations and traditions of his birthright. His father, a man whose face was etched with the wisdom of years and the quiet strength of one who had weathered many seasons, listened without interruption, his expression unreadable, though a deep sorrow, like a shadow, seemed to pass over his eyes. He did not immediately rebuke his son, nor did he erupt in anger, which many fathers in that time and place might have done, seeing such a request as a profound dissonance. Instead, he simply looked at his son, perhaps trying to discern the depth of this longing, the true nature of the yearning that drove such an audacious demand. He saw not just a request for material wealth, but a heart restless and yearning for a different life, a different identity. After a long moment, a silence filled with unspoken thoughts and the quiet weight of family history, the father made a decision that surprised even his household. He agreed. He did not argue, did not plead, did not try to dissuade his son with tales of the dangers of the world or the comforts of home. With a quiet resignation that spoke volumes of his love and perhaps his understanding of his son's unyielding spirit, he set about the complex and often lengthy process of dividing his property. This was no simple task, involving not just money, but land, livestock, and other assets, all of which had to be assessed, valued, and then formally apportioned. It would have involved scribes, witnesses, and careful calculations, a public declaration of a private sorrow. The elder son, observing this unfolding drama from a respectful distance, likely felt a mixture of bewilderment and perhaps a quiet resentment. He had labored faithfully, day in and day out, upholding his duties, and now his younger brother, with a mere request, was being granted a substantial portion of the family wealth that he, the elder, had helped to cultivate and protect. The injustice of it, from his perspective, must have been a bitter pill to swallow, though he remained silent, respecting his father's authority and the solemnity of the moment. It was not long after this, perhaps a matter of days or weeks, but certainly not months, that the younger son gathered all that was now his. The clinking of coins, the rustle of documents, the quiet bustle of preparations for a journey filled the air around him. He converted his share of the inheritance into liquid assets, likely gold and silver, easily transportable and universally accepted. This act itself was significant. It meant selling off land, perhaps livestock, things that were the very foundation of their family's wealth and identity. It was a final, decisive break from the agrarian life and the ancestral ties that defined their existence. One morning, as the first blush of dawn painted the eastern sky in soft hues of rose and lavender, before the heat of the day had fully settled, the younger son prepared to leave. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the fresh scent of dew-kissed earth and the faint, sweet aroma of blossoms from the fruit trees. He said his goodbyes, perhaps a hurried embrace with his father, a nod to his elder brother, his heart a mixture of exhilaration and a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of fear. He swung his saddlebag, heavy with his newly acquired wealth, over his shoulder, adjusted the folds of his tunic, and without looking back, set off down the dusty road that led away from his home, away from the familiar hills and the quiet rhythms of his past. He was heading towards a true far country, a phrase that in their language implied not just geographical distance, but a place culturally and morally distinct, a land where the customs and values of his upbringing might hold little sway. His journey would have been arduous, traveling by foot or perhaps on the back of a donkey, along ancient trade routes that snaked through diverse landscapes. He would have passed through small villages, bustling market towns, and perhaps even larger cities, each step taking him further from the familiar comfort of his father's house. The days would have been long, the sun beating down on him, the dust rising with every step, and the nights cool, perhaps spent in simple inns or under the vast, star-studded sky. With each mile, the sense of liberation would have grown, a heady feeling of independence, of boundless possibilities stretching out before him like the open road itself. Upon arriving in this far country, a place likely a vibrant, cosmopolitan city, perhaps Damascus or Alexandria, or one of the many Hellenistic cities that dotted the Roman and Parthian empires, the younger son found himself immersed in a world utterly different from his quiet village. The air would have been thick with the cacophony of many languages, the exotic scents of spices from distant lands, roasting meats, and fragrant perfumes. The streets would have teemed with people of all descriptions, merchants hawking their wares, soldiers in their gleaming armor, philosophers debating in public squares, entertainers captivating crowds with music and dance, and women adorned in colorful silks. The architecture would have been grander, the buildings taller, the public spaces more elaborate than anything he had ever known. He, with his substantial inheritance, would have been welcomed into this new world with open arms, particularly by those who saw in his wealth an opportunity for their own gain. He quickly fell in with a crowd of companions who were eager to share in his newfound prosperity, people who leave for pleasure and immediate gratification. His days and nights became a blur of lavish feasts, where rich wines flowed freely from elaborate amphorae, and exotic dishes, prepared with spices and ingredients he had never tasted, were served on polished platters. There would have been music, often played on lyres and flutes, filling the air with intoxicating melodies, and dancing, vibrant and unrestrained, unlike the more sedate celebrations of his homeland. He would have frequented gambling dens, where fortunes were won and lost with the roll of dice or the turn of a card, the air thick with smoke and the murmur of excited voices. He would have sought out the company of prostitutes, women who offered fleeting companionship and sensual pleasures, further eroding his moral compass and the values instilled in him since childhood. Each indulgence, each fleeting pleasure, chipped away at his inheritance, like grains of sand slipping through an open hand. He was leaving a life of riotous leaving, a phrase that in their language implied not just extravagance, but a reckless, uncontrolled dissipation of one's resources and one's self, a life utterly devoid of discipline or foresight. He experienced a kind of freedom he had always craved, a life without responsibility, without the watchful eye of his father, without the expectations of his community. For a time, this life must have felt exhilarating, a dream come true. He was master of his own destiny, spending as he pleased, surrounded by new friends who laughed at his jokes and flattered his ego, always eager for the next lavish meal or expensive entertainment. He felt important, admired, and utterly unburdened. However, the nature of such a life is inherently unsustainable. The stream of wealth, no matter how substantial, eventually dwindles when there is no source of replenishment. His inheritance, once a considerable sum, began to shrink, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, like a spring drying up in the summer heat. The lavish feasts became less frequent, the expensive wines less abundant, the gifts to his companions less generous. The laughter of his friends began to sound hollow, their smiles less genuine, their presence less constant. Then, a new hardship struck the land, a severe famine that spread across the too far country. This was not just a local scarcity, but a widespread agricultural disaster, perhaps caused by drought or disease, leading to widespread crop failure and a dramatic increase in the price of food. For those who had lived responsibly, saving and planning, it was a difficult time. For the younger son, who had squandered everything, it was catastrophic. His remaining money, already meager, now bought even less, and soon it was gone entirely. His friends, who had flocked to him when his pockets were full, now vanished like shadows at dusk. The invitations to feast ceased, the flattering words disappeared. He found himself utterly alone, in a foreign land, with no money, no connections, and no skills relevant to this new, harsh reality. The vibrant city, once a playground of endless delights, now seemed cold and indifferent, its bustling streets a stark reminder of his isolation and destitution. The hunger gnawed at his stomach, a constant, sharp pain, and the cold of the nights, once easily banished by warm clothes and comfortable lodgings, now bit deep into his bones. Desperate, with his stomach rumbling and his clothes growing ragged, he sought employment. But in a time of famine, jobs were scarce, and for a young man accustomed to a life of leisure, with no practical skills for survival in such a harsh environment, finding work was exceedingly difficult. He was a stranger, an outsider, and his previous life of extravagance would have made him an unlikely candidate for any respectable position. Finally, in his utter desperation, he managed to find a job, a position so lowly, so degrading, that it would have been considered an absolute last resort for any young man from a respectable Jewish family. He hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country. This citizen, recognizing the young man's desperate plight and perhaps his foreignness, assigned him to the most contemptible of tasks, feeding pigs. In Jewish culture, pigs were considered unclean animals, an abomination. To even touch a pig, let alone care for them, was to become ritually impure. For a Jewish man, especially one from a prosperous family, this was the ultimate humiliation, a profound spiritual and social degradation. He would have spent his days in the dusty, foul-smelling pig pens, surrounded by the grunting, snorting animals, his clothes stained with their filth, the stench clinging to him, a constant reminder of how far he had fallen. The sun would beat down on him, the flies would buzz around his head, and the endless task of feeding and tending to these forbidden creatures would have stretched before him, monotonous and soul-crushing. His hunger, however, was so intense, so relentless, that it overshadowed even the profound shame of his circumstances. He longed to eat the very food he was feeding to the pigs, to the carob pods, a coarse, fibrous fruit, often used as animal fodder, barely edible for humans, but at least capable of filling an empty stomach. These pods, dry and unappetizing, would have been a bitter symbol of his utter destitution. Yet, even this meager sustenance was denied to him. No one gave him anything, the text states, emphasizing the complete abandonment and isolation he experienced. He was truly at the lowest point imaginable, stripped of dignity, wealth, family, and even basic human compassion. It was in this abject state, surrounded by the grunting pigs, the stench of their pen, and the gnawing pain of hunger, that a profound shift began to occur within him. The initial shock and despair slowly gave way to a moment of clarity, a brutal awakening. The fog of self-indulgence and reckless living began to lift, revealing the stark reality of his situation. He came to himself, a phrase that suggests a return to sanity, a realization of his true condition after a period of delusion and self-deception. He began to reflect, to compare his current wretchedness with the life he had so carelessly abandoned. He thought of his father's house, not just as a place, but as a symbol of abundance, security, and love. He remembered the servants, those who worked for his father, who had more than enough to eat, plenty of bread, while he, the son, was starving in a foreign land. The contrast was stark, almost unbearable. He, who had once been a master, was now lower than a hired hand, lower even than the animals he tended. A plan, born of desperation and a glimmer of hope, began to form in his mind. It was a plan rooted in humility, a recognition of his profound failure and unworthiness. He knew he could not return as a son, not after what he had done. He had squandered his inheritance, dishonored his father, and broken the sacred bonds of family. He had forfeited his right to be called a son. "I will arise and go to my father," he resolved, the words a quiet promise to himself, "and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'" This was not a plea for restoration to his former status, but a humble request for the lowest possible position in his father's household, a position that would at least offer him food and shelter, a chance to simply survive. It was a complete surrender of his pride, a full acknowledgement of his guilt and his lost standing. With this decision firmly made, a fragile spark of hope ignited within his weary soul. He gathered what little strength he had left, pushed himself up from the dirt of the pigpen, and began the long, arduous journey back towards his home. The road that had once represented freedom and adventure now represented repentance and a desperate plea for mercy. Each step would have been a struggle, his body weakened by hunger, his spirit burdened by shame, but driven by the faint glimmer of hope that his father, despite everything, might still show him some small measure of compassion. Meanwhile, back at the family farm, life continued its steady rhythm, but for the father, a profound change had occurred. The quiet joy that once animated his days had been replaced by a deep, persistent ache, a hollow space in his heart where his younger son used to be. Every morning, as the sun climbed above the eastern hills, casting its first golden rays across the valley, he would walk to the edge of his property, to a spot where the dusty road leading away from the village was visible for a long stretch. He would stand there, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, his eyes scanning the road, searching for a familiar figure, a sign, anything that might indicate his son's return. He did this not just once, but every day, morning and evening, a silent vigil that became a part of his daily routine. The servants, the elder son, and the neighbors would have noticed this quiet ritual, a testament to the father's enduring grief and his unwavering, almost irrational hope. They might have whispered among themselves, shaking their heads, believing the younger son was lost forever, his inheritance squandered, his life undoubtedly ruined in that far-off, wicked country. But the father, with a love that transcended logic and societal expectation, continued his watch. He did not give up hope, did not close his heart, did not allow bitterness to take root. Instead, he simply waited, his heart a silent prayer, his eyes perpetually scanning the distant road, a beacon of persistent love in the quiet landscape. One day, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, casting long, soft shadows across the fields, the father was at his usual post, his gaze fixed on the winding path. In the distance, a figure appeared, a small, indistinct silhouette against the fading light. It was just a speck at first, barely discernible, but something in the way it moved, perhaps the familiar gait, or simply the father's yearning heart, made him pause. He squinted, his old eyes straining to make out the details. The figure was far off, too far to clearly identify, but there was something about it that stirred a deep, primal recognition within him. It was a figure that looked weary, perhaps a little stooped, certainly not the proud, confident young man who had left so many months ago. The clothes were ragged, the walk hesitant, but as the figure drew a little closer, the father's heart began to pound with a mixture of disbelief and an overwhelming surge of emotion. It was him. It was his son. He did not wait. He did not hesitate. He did not consider his dignity, his status, or the expectations of his community. In a culture where elders maintained a dignified composure, especially in public, the father did something utterly extraordinary, something that would have been seen as undignified and even scandalous for a man of his standing. He ran. He gathered the folds of his long robe, hitched them up, and with a burst of energy that belied his age and the sorrow he had carried, he began to run down the road, towards his returning son. His heart was bursting, a dam of pent-up grief and longing finally breaking. He ran with an urgency born of pure, unconditional love, oblivious to the dust he kicked up, oblivious to the stares of any servants or neighbors who might have witnessed this unprecedented display. His eyes, now filled with tears, were fixed solely on the approaching figure, the son he had mourned as lost, now miraculously, impossibly, returning. The son, exhausted and ashamed, would have seen his father running towards him from a distance. Perhaps he expected anger, or at best, a cool, reserved welcome. He certainly would not have expected this undignified, unrestrained outpouring of affection. As his father drew closer, his face etched with a mixture of joy and tears, the son would have felt a fresh wave of emotion wash over him to relief, regret, and an overwhelming sense of being truly seen and truly loved, despite his unworthiness. Before the son could even utter the carefully rehearsed confession he had prepared, before he could articulate his plea to be made a servant, his father reached him. The father did not wait for the son to speak, did not wait for an apology. Instead, he threw his arms around his son, embracing him tightly, holding him close, feeling the thinness of his body, the roughness of his ragged clothes. The familiar scent of his son now mingled with the smells of the road and the pigpen. He kissed him repeatedly, not just a polite peck, but deep, heartfelt kisses, a clear sign of profound affection and forgiveness. The son, overwhelmed by this unexpected reception, would have felt the warmth of his father's embrace, the strength of his love, a love that had never wavered, even in his absence. Amidst the embrace, the son, still clinging to his prepared confession, managed to stammer out part of his speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son." He got no further. His father, still holding him, still showering him with kisses, interrupted him, not with words of rebuke, but with urgent commands to his servants. Quickly, the father exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion, "Bring the best robe and put it on him. And put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead, and is alive again, he was lost, and is found." The servants, who had likely followed their master, now stood by, witnessing this extraordinary scene. They would have been accustomed to the father's quiet sorrow, his daily vigil, but this joyous outburst, this immediate and extravagant welcome for a son who had squandered his inheritance and brought shame upon the family, would have been astonishing. Yet they obeyed without question, moving quickly to fulfill their master's commands. The best robe was not just any garment, it was likely the father's own finest robe, perhaps reserved for special occasions or honored guests. To place it on the son was a public declaration of his restored status, a symbol of honor and dignity. The ring was a signet ring, a mark of authority and family identity. It signified that the son was not merely a guest or a servant, but a full member of the family, entrusted with its affairs, with the power to conduct business in his father's name. The sandals were also significant. Servants typically went barefoot. To give him sandals was to acknowledge him as a free man, a son, not a slave or a hired hand. These were not just practical items, they were powerful symbols, each one a profound statement of restoration and acceptance. And then, the fatted calf. This was an animal specifically raised and fattened for a grand celebration, a feast of immense joy and significance. Killing it meant an immediate, lavish banquet, a public declaration to the entire community that this was a moment of profound rejoicing. It was not a quiet, private reunion, but a full-blown celebration, designed to announce the son's return and restoration to everyone. The father's instructions were clear. This was a time for unbridled joy, for feasting, for music, for dancing, for proclaiming the miracle of a lost son found, of a dead son brought back to life. The news would have spread quickly through the household and then into the surrounding village. The sounds of preparation for a feast would have filled the air, to the bustling of servants, the clatter of pots and pans, the joyous anticipation. The father, his heart overflowing, would have led his son back to the house, perhaps still with his arm around him, introducing him to the household, ensuring that everyone understood that this was a moment of pure celebration. The son, still reeling from the unexpected warmth of his father's embrace and the overwhelming generosity of his welcome, would have felt a profound sense of relief, of belonging, a feeling he had not experienced since he had left this very home. He was not just forgiven, he was celebrated, embraced, and fully restored, his past transgressions seemingly washed away by the tide of his Father's boundless love. The aroma of roasting meat, the sounds of music beginning to swell, the excited chatter of servants preparing for the feast, all these sensory details would have enveloped the son, confirming that he was truly home, truly accepted, truly loved, not as a hired servant, but as a cherished son. Love. The aroma of roasting meat, the sounds of music beginning to swell, the excited chatter of servants preparing for the feast, all these sensory details would have enveloped the son, confirming that he was truly home, truly accepted, truly loved, not as a hired servant, but as a cherished son, as the Father had so tenderly affirmed with the kiss upon his cheek and the ring upon his finger, a symbol of restored authority and belonging. Meanwhile, out in the fields, under the late afternoon sun that had begun its slow descent towards the western hills, casting long, stretching shadows across the terraced olive groves and ripening grain, the elder son was diligently at work. He might have been overseeing the final stages of the day's harvest, perhaps inspecting the irrigation channels that snaked through the fertile land, ensuring every drop of precious water reached its designated plant, or perhaps he was simply guiding the oxen, their massive, muscular bodies straining against the yoke as they pulled the heavy plough through the rich, dark earth, turning over the soil in preparation for the next planting season. The air out here was different from the bustling courtyard. It was filled with the earthy scent of turned soil, the dry, sweet fragrance of wheat stalks, and the faint, distant bleating of sheep grazing on a faraway hillside. The only sounds were the rhythmic creak of the plough, the soft snorting of the oxen, and perhaps the call of a shepherd to his flock, carried on the gentle breeze. His hands, calloused and strong from years of honest labor, moved with practiced efficiency, his brow perhaps furrowed in concentration, or perhaps simply from the effort of his toil under the sun. He had always been the dutiful son, the one who stayed, the one who worked, the one who upheld the family's honor and prosperity. His life was a steady rhythm of responsibility, a predictable cycle of seasons and tasks, each day blending into the next with a quiet sense of purpose. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, signaling the end of the working day, the elder son began his journey homeward. His steps would have been measured, perhaps a little tired, but filled with the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent. He would have been looking forward to the familiar comforts of home, a simple meal, the quiet company of his family, the peaceful slumber that follows honest labor. As he drew nearer to the house, however, a subtle shift in the atmosphere would have pricked his senses. The usual evening quiet, punctuated only by the distant lowing of cattle or the chirping of crickets, was absent. Instead, a cacophony of unfamiliar sounds began to drift towards him on the evening air. The distinct, joyous strains of music, not the simple melodies played on a shepherd's flute, but the more elaborate sounds of lyres and tambourines, instruments reserved for celebrations of significant joy. And beneath the music, a murmur of many voices, a boisterous, festive chatter that seemed to spill out from the very walls of his father's house. A frown, perhaps, would have creased his brow. This was unusual. His father was a man of quiet dignity, his household generally one of order and calm, especially in the evenings. Such revelry was rare, reserved only for the most important festivals or family milestones. What could it be? He quickened his pace a little, his curiosity now outweighing his fatigue, his mind perhaps running through a list of possibilities, none of which quite fit the exuberance he was hearing. As he approached the outer gate of the courtyard, the sounds grew louder, more insistent, and then the unmistakable aroma of roasting meat, rich and savory, wafted towards him, mingling with the sweet scent of wine and the faint, earthy smell of fresh bread baking in the outdoor oven. This was no ordinary supper, this was a feast, a grand celebration. He paused at the threshold, perhaps leaning against the rough-hewn stone of the gatepost, his eyes scanning the bustling scene within. Servants, usually engaged in their quiet evening duties, were now hurrying to and fro, their faces alight with excitement. Guests, perhaps neighbors or distant relatives, were already gathering, their laughter echoing through the courtyard. And at the center of it all, the music pulsed with an infectious rhythm. Confused, perhaps even a little disoriented by this unexpected spectacle, he called out to one of the servants, a young man he had known since childhood, who was rushing past with a tray laden with freshly baked flatbreads. "What is happening?" he would have asked, his voice perhaps a little sharper than he intended, a note of bewilderment and perhaps a hint of irritation coloring his tone. "What is all this noise? This music? This feasting?" The servant, his face beaming with unreserved joy, turned to him, his eyes wide with excitement. "Your brother has come home," he exclaimed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound." The words, though simple, would have struck the elder son with the force of a physical blow. His brother, the one who had left, the one who had demanded his inheritance, squandered it, and vanished into the distant lands, taking with him a piece of the family's wealth, a piece of its reputation, and a piece of his father's heart. He had returned. And not only had he returned, but he was being celebrated, welcomed with a feast fit for a king, a feast that he, the faithful son, had never received, despite his unwavering devotion and years of tireless service. A wave of emotions, complex and conflicting, would have washed over him. Surprise, certainly. Disbelief, perhaps. But beneath those initial reactions, a deeper, more unsettling feeling began to simmer: resentment. A bitter, cold resentment that called in his gut, tightening his muscles and hardening his features. All these years, he had been here. All these years, he had worked the fields, tended the flocks, managed the household, borne the weight of responsibility, always striving to please his father, to uphold the family's name. He had never asked for a celebration, never demanded a feast, never even considered straying from the path of duty. And yet, this brother, this prodigal, this wastrel, who had brought shame upon them, who had squandered their resources, was now being honored with the grandest of receptions. He refused to go in. The very thought of stepping into that joyous, bustling scene, of witnessing his brother's triumphant return, of seeing his father's beaming face showered upon the one who had caused him so much pain, was unbearable. He stood his ground outside the gate, his arms perhaps crossed over his chest, his jaw set, a storm brewing within him. The music, which a moment ago had seemed joyous, now grated on his ears, a mocking symphony of injustice. The aroma of roasting meat, once inviting, now smelled of betrayal. He felt a profound sense of unfairness, a deep wound to his sense of justice and his own self-worth. The father, noticing his elder son's absence from the festivities, and perhaps sensing the shift in the atmosphere at the gate, would have felt a familiar pang in his heart. He was a man of deep compassion, and though overjoyed by the return of his lost son, he was also keenly attuned to the feelings of his other children. He would have left the warmth and merriment of the feast, stepping out into the cooler evening air, the sounds of celebration softening behind him, to seek out his elder son. His face, still radiant with joy, would have softened with concern as he saw the rigid posture, the unyielding expression on his firstborn's face. "My son," he would have said, his voice gentle, filled with an unwavering love that encompassed both his children, "why do you stand out here? Come, join us. Come inside and celebrate with your brother." But the elder son's anger, fueled by years of unspoken expectations and now inflamed by what he perceived as a profound injustice, would have burst forth. He would have turned to his father, his voice perhaps low and trembling with suppressed emotion, or perhaps sharp and accusatory, the words spilling out like a torrent. "Look," he would have exclaimed, his arm perhaps sweeping out in a gesture that encompassed his own years of toil and his brother's reckless abandonment. "All these years I have been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends." His words painted a vivid picture of his dedication. Slaving for you, to a phrase that spoke volumes of his perception of his own service, perhaps not as a loving act but as a burdensome obligation. Never disobeyed your orders, to highlighting his unwavering obedience, his adherence to every command, every expectation. He was contrasting his own faultless record with his brother's scandalous behavior. And then, the sting of his perceived neglect, "Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends." This was a small, seemingly insignificant request, a young goat for a modest celebration, a fraction of the cost of the fattened calf now being consumed inside. But in his mind, it represented a lifetime of unacknowledged loyalty, a lack of recognition for his steadfastness. He felt overlooked, unappreciated, his quiet devotion overshadowed by the dramatic return of the prodigal. And then, the bitter core of his resentment, directed not just at his father, but at his brother, and by extension, at the very concept of unconditional love that his father was now so freely demonstrating. "But when this son of yours," he continued, the words "this son of yours" carrying a deliberate distancing, a refusal to acknowledge the familial bond, "who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." The accusation was clear, sharp, and laced with moral judgment. He painted his brother as a dissolute wastrel, someone who had not only wasted their wealth but had done so in the most shameful way, bringing dishonor upon the family name. The image of prostitutes was a common cultural trope for ultimate moral degradation and reckless spending, a stark contrast to his own virtuous and hard-working life. And for this son, this sinner, this betrayer, a feast. A fattened calf, a symbol of the highest honor and celebration, usually reserved for the most significant guests or occasions, now lavished upon him. The father, standing there in the fading light, would have listened patiently, his heart aching with the pain of his elder son's words. He understood the depth of his son's feelings, the sense of injustice, the feeling of being unappreciated. He knew his elder son's heart, his steadfastness, his loyalty. But he also knew the boundless nature of his own love, a love that did not diminish for one son simply because it embraced another. He would have reached out, perhaps gently placing a hand on his son's arm, his touch conveying a warmth and understanding that words alone could not. "My son," he would have begun, his voice soft, reassuring, yet firm in its unwavering message of love and truth. "You are always with me, and everything I have is yours." These words were a profound affirmation, a gentle reminder of the elder son's secure and privileged position within the household. He was not merely a servant, he was a son, and as such, he was heir to everything. The fields, the flocks, the wealth, the very essence of the family's prosperity, to all of it was his, not just in the future, but in the present. He had never been deprived, he had simply perhaps never fully realized the extent of his own inheritance, his own belonging, his own value. He had been so focused on his duties, on his obedience, that he had perhaps forgotten the inherent joy and security of his position. The father's words would have been an attempt to gently shift his elder son's perspective, to help him see beyond the immediate sting of perceived injustice and to recognize the enduring truth of his own cherished place in the family. "Everything I have is yours" was not a casual statement, it was a declaration of absolute trust and shared ownership, a testament to the elder son's unwavering presence and contribution to the family's well-being. He had never been denied a goat, or a feast, or anything else, he simply had to ask, or rather, he already possessed the right to all of it. He was not a hired hand earning wages, he was a co-owner, a partner, a beloved heir. Then, the father would have addressed the core of the celebration, the reason for the music and the feast, not as a slight against the elder son, but as an expression of profound joy and relief. "But we had to celebrate and be glad," he continued, his voice imbued with a gentle urgency, "because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again, he was lost and is found." These words were the heart of the father's explanation, a window into his own deep emotional landscape. The imagery of dead and alive again, lost and found, was not literal in the sense of physical death, but rather spoke to a spiritual and relational death. When the younger son left, he had severed his ties, he had become estranged, he had, in the father's heart, been lost to him. The father had mourned him as one would mourn the dead, carrying a silent grief, a constant ache for his missing child. His return was nothing short of a resurrection, a miraculous restoration of a relationship that had been broken, a life that had been squandered, a son who had been given up for lost. The fattened calf was not merely a symbol of extravagance, it was a symbol of thanksgiving, of a profound spiritual homecoming. In ancient Near Eastern culture, the killing of a fattened calf was indeed a significant event, reserved for the most important occasions. It signified not only wealth but also the depth of the host's joy and honor for the guest. For this father, the return of his prodigal son was such an occasion, a moment of profound grace and redemption that transcended all previous wrongs. The father's words were an invitation to empathy, a plea for his elder son to share in his joy, to understand the depth of his relief. He was not asking his elder son to condone his brother's past actions, nor to forget the pain he had caused. Rather, he was asking him to recognize the miracle of his brother's return, the sheer wonder of a lost soul finding its way back home, and to understand that such a moment called for nothing less than unbridled celebration. The Father's love was so expansive that it could encompass both the unwavering loyalty of his elder son and the dramatic repentance of his younger son, finding a unique way to cherish each of them. He yearned for his two sons, now both physically present, to be reconciled not just to him, but to each other, to find a way to share in the family's restored wholeness. The story, as told by Jesus, often leaves the elder son's reaction to this final, tender explanation unstated. The narrative ends with the father's words hanging in the air, a profound statement of grace and love, leaving the listener to ponder the elder son's choice. Did he soften? Did the father's gentle reasoning penetrate the hardened shell of his resentment? Did he eventually step through the gate, into the light and warmth of the feast, to join the celebration of his brother's return? Or did he remain outside, alone in the gathering darkness, clinging to his sense of injustice, unable to embrace the boundless, unconditional love that his father offered to both of his sons? The silence that follows the father's words in the parable is a powerful one, inviting contemplation. It asks us to consider our own reactions to grace, to forgiveness, to the unexpected joy of another's redemption. It challenges us to look inward at our own capacity for compassion, for understanding, for celebrating the return of the lost, even when it feels undeserved by our human measure of justice. The parable, in its quiet wisdom, does not offer a neat resolution for the elder son, but rather presents a choice, a path towards either continued resentment or transformative embrace. The night would have grown deeper around them, the stars beginning to prick through the velvet blackness of the Judean sky, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the silent exchange between father and son. The sounds of the feast, though still present, would have become a little more distant, a little more muted, as if the world itself held its breath, awaiting the elder son's decision. The cool night air would have carried the scent of jasmine from a nearby bush, mingling with the lingering aromas of the feast, a complex tapestry of fragrances that spoke of both celebration and quiet contemplation. Perhaps a gentle breeze would have rustled through the olive trees, their ancient leaves whispering secrets to the night, as the father stood patiently, his loving gaze fixed upon his son, his heart full of hope, his arms still metaphorically open, waiting for his elder son to step into the light, to accept the boundless love that had always been his, and to share in the joy of a family made whole once more. The distant call of a night bird, a soft hoot from an owl perched in the ancient sycamore tree, would have punctuated the quiet, adding to the serene, contemplative atmosphere of the moment, as the father continued to stand there, his presence a steadfast beacon of unconditional love, his heart yearning for reconciliation, for the complete restoration of his family, for both his sons to find their place within the warmth of his embrace, under the silent witness of the countless stars that slowly began to appear, one by one, across the vast expanse of the night. Across the vast expanse of the night, as the cool air of evening settled gently over the fields and the distant sounds of village life began to soften into a hushed murmur. The younger son, meanwhile, had traveled far, his journey taking him through sun-baked valleys and over rolling hills, each step carrying him further from the familiar scent of his father's olive groves and the comforting rhythm of home. He had chosen a distant country, a place where the customs were different, where the language might have held unfamiliar cadences, and where the faces he encountered were all new, unburdened by any knowledge of his past or his family's esteemed name. This was a land of opportunity, he had told himself, a place where his newfound wealth, the substantial portion of his inheritance that he now carried, could truly blossom and bring him the freedom he so eagerly craved. He envisioned grand houses, lavish feasts, and the company of vibrant, exciting people who understood the true meaning of living life to its fullest, unencumbered by the old-fashioned notions of duty and tradition that had felt so stifling back home. His arrival in this new land was, at first, everything he had imagined. The gold and silver coins, heavy in the leather pouch at his side, seemed to open every door. He found himself surrounded by those who were drawn to his generosity, to the easy way he spent, never counting, never questioning the cost. The days blurred into a succession of banquets, where spiced wines flowed freely from ornate amphorae and tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, sweet pastries, and exotic fruits brought from distant lands. Musicians with lyres and flutes filled the air with lively melodies, and dancers moved with graceful abandon, their colorful garments swirling in the torchlight. He reveled in the laughter, the camaraderie, the feeling of being admired and sought after, mistaking this fleeting attention for genuine friendship. He purchased fine garments, woven from rich dyes and softest wool, adorning himself with silver rings and intricate brooches, eager to present an image of prosperity and sophistication. He rode the finest horses, their polished hoofs clattering on the paved streets of the city, and his retinue grew, a small entourage of servants and hangers-on who catered to his every whim, their flattery a constant, intoxicating hum in his ears. He frequented the bustling marketplaces, not to haggle for necessities like his father would have done, but to acquire luxuries, rare perfumes, intricate carvings, and shimmering silks from the East. He gambled in dimly lit taverns, the clatter of dice and the murmur of voices creating a thrilling backdrop to his reckless wagers, often winning, sometimes losing, but always with a carefree shrug, for there seemed to be an endless supply of wealth at his disposal. The nights were long and filled with revelry, the city lights a beacon of endless possibility, and the days were spent recovering, often sleeping late in soft beds, the scent of stale wine and exotic spices lingering in the air. He felt unbound, truly free for the first time, or so he believed, from the watchful eyes of his father, from the expectations of his elder brother, and from the quiet, predictable rhythm of the farm. He had escaped the dust of the fields and the bleating of sheep, trading it for the vibrant, sometimes chaotic, pulse of city life. Yet, beneath the surface of this glittering existence, a subtle shift began to occur, imperceptible at first, like the slow erosion of a riverbank. The laughter, though loud, sometimes felt hollow. The friendships, though numerous, lacked the quiet depth of shared history. The endless pursuit of pleasure, once exhilarating, began to feel like a relentless treadmill, demanding more and more to maintain the same fleeting sense of satisfaction. The coins in his pouch, once a seemingly inexhaustible treasure, were diminishing with alarming speed. Each lavish purchase, each extravagant meal, each careless wager chipped away at the foundation of his independence. He noticed, too, that the smiles of his companion seemed to brighten with each new round of drinks he ordered, and their attention waned if his generosity faltered even for a moment. The change was not sudden, but gradual, like the fading of a vibrant sunset into the muted hues of twilight. First, the finest wines were replaced by those of lesser quality. Then, the lavish banquets became smaller gatherings. The servants, once numerous, began to dwindle, finding employment with other, more consistently wealthy patrons. He started to feel a chill wind blow through his once warm circle of acquaintances, their eyes now holding a different kind of calculation, a subtle distancing. He tried to ignore it, to double down on his spending, hoping to rekindle the earlier enthusiasm, but it was like trying to scoop water with a sieve. The wellspring of his inheritance was drying up, coin by coin, feast by feast, gamble by gamble. Then came the moment of stark realization, a cold, hard truth that struck him like a physical blow. The last of his money was gone. The leather pouch, once heavy and comforting, now hung limp and empty at his side, a silent testament to his folly. The laughter of his former companions had vanished, replaced by averted gazes and mumbled excuses. The doors that had once swung open so readily now remained firmly shut. He was alone, utterly and completely, in a foreign land, without resources, without friends, and without a single familiar face to turn to. The vibrant city, which had once promised so much, now seemed to mock him with its indifference, its bustling streets a stark contrast to his sudden, profound emptiness. And as if to compound his misery, a severe famine swept through that distant country. The fertile lands, usually abundant with grain and fruit, became parched and cracked under a relentless sun. The rivers, which usually flowed with life-giving water, dwindled to muddy trickles. Prices for even the most basic foodstuffs soared, far beyond the reach of those without means. The air grew heavy with the dust of failed harvests and the quiet desperation of hungry people. The vibrant markets grew quiet, their stalls empty, their vendors haggard. The joyous music that had once filled the taverns was replaced by the low hum of anxiety and the gnawing pangs of hunger. The young man, once so proud and self-assured, now found himself truly destitute. His fine garments, once so new and bright, were now stained and worn, their rich colors faded by the sun and the dust of the road. His belly ached with a hunger he had never known, a constant, gnawing emptiness that overshadowed all other thoughts. He tried to find work, any work, to earn a few coins for food. He offered his services, once so readily accepted for his generosity, but now he was just another desperate, hungry mouth in a land already struggling to feed its own. His hands, once soft from idleness, were now calloused and dirty, but still, no one would hire him. The skills he possessed, managing an estate, overseeing olive presses, tending vineyards, were not needed here, or perhaps his appearance, ragged and gaunt, spoke of unreliability. Finally, in a desperate attempt to survive, he approached one of the citizens of that country, a man who, perhaps, saw a flicker of something in the young man's eyes, or perhaps simply needed cheap labor. This man, a farmer, had a task for him, a job that no one else wanted, a task considered deeply unclean and beneath the dignity of any self-respecting Jew. He sent him into his fields to feed pigs. The very thought would have been anathema to him in his father's house, where pigs were considered unclean animals, never to be touched, never to be consumed. Yet, here he was, reduced to tending to them, his once proud spirit humbled by the harsh realities of his new existence. The days were long and arduous, spent in the dusty, sun-baked fields, the air thick with the smell of the swine and their waste. His clothes became caked with mud and filth, and his hands, once accustomed to holding goblets of wine, now scooped out slop for the grunting animals. He watched as the pigs eagerly devoured the carob pods, the coarse, dry husks that were their meager sustenance, and a profound, aching hunger twisted in his own stomach. These carob pods, usually only fit for animal feed or for the poorest of the poor in times of famine, looked almost appetizing to his starving eyes. He longed to fill his belly with them, to quiet the relentless gnawing, but no one offered him even this humble fare. The farmer, his employer, was likely struggling himself, and certainly had no extra food for a hired hand, especially one who seemed to have fallen so far. As he sat there, day after day, in the stench and the heat, watching the pigs eat, a profound shift began to occur within him, not just physically, but deep within his very being. The illusions of freedom and pleasure had long since evaporated, leaving behind a bitter residue of regret. The memories of his past life, once pushed aside in his pursuit of novelty, now flooded his mind with an almost unbearable clarity. He remembered the abundance of his father's house, the warmth of the kitchen, the smell of freshly baked bread, the taste of rich olive oil and sweet figures. He remembered the servants, those who worked for his father, who always had more than enough to eat, who had shelter and security and the respect of their master. Even the lowest of his father's hired hands lived better than he did now, reduced to coveting the food of pigs. He began to truly come to himself, as the ancient texts might describe it, a moment of awakening from a long, self-imposed slumber. The fog of reckless indulgence lifted, revealing the stark landscape of his choices. He saw, with painful clarity, the foolishness of his demands, the arrogance of his departure, and the utter waste of his inheritance. He recognized the depth of his father's love, a love he had so carelessly spurned, and the security he had so readily abandoned. The shame was immense, a heavy cloak that settled over him, but beneath it, a tiny spark of hope began to flicker. How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? He thought to himself, his voice a dry whisper in the dusty air, while I perish here with hunger. The contrast was stark, almost unbearable. He, a son, was starving, while even the lowest of his father's employees lived in relative comfort. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He pictured the bustling kitchen, the overflowing granaries, the laughter of the servants as they shared their meals. He pictured his father, always generous, always mindful of the needs of those under his care. A decision began to form in his mind, tentative at first, then growing stronger, fueled by desperation and a burgeoning sense of humility. He would go back. He would return to his father. The thought was terrifying, fraught with shame and uncertainty. How could he face the man whose love he had so grievously wounded, whose trust he had so thoroughly broken? What would his father say? What would his elder brother think? The weight of his past actions pressed down on him, but the alternative to remain here, to slowly starve in the company of pigs was even more unbearable. I will arise and go to my father, he resolved, the words forming a silent vow in his heart, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. This was not a plea for restoration to his former status, not a demand for his rights as a son. This was a plea for mercy, for a chance to atone, to simply exist within the periphery of his father's household, to earn his keep, to be a shadow of his former self, if only he could escape this wretched existence. He understood, with a clarity born of suffering, that he had forfeited all claims to sonship. He was willing to accept the lowest position, to work alongside the very servants he had once taken for granted, if it meant escaping the slow, agonizing grip of starvation and the crushing weight of his loneliness. With this decision firmly set in his heart, he began the long journey home. Each step was heavy, not just with physical exhaustion, but with the burden of his shame and the uncertainty of his reception. The road back was not the triumphant procession he had once envisioned, but a solitary, arduous trek. He walked through the same landscapes he had once traversed with such eager anticipation, but now they seemed to reflect his inner turmoil. The sun beat down just as fiercely, the dust rose with each weary footfall, but now there was no grand destination, no promise of lavish indulgence, only the hope of forgiveness and a humble place to rest. His clothes were ragged, his feet bare and bruised, his body gaunt from hunger. His face, once full and youthful, was now etched with the lines of hardship and regret, his eyes hollowed by suffering. He no longer carried himself with the proud swagger of a wealthy heir, but with the bowed head and hesitant steps of a penitent. He avoided the main roads, preferring the quieter, less traveled paths, perhaps out of a lingering sense of shame, or perhaps to avoid the curious stares of strangers who might recognize the remnants of a once familiar face. He ate what little he could find along the way, wild berries, roots, anything that might stave off the relentless pangs of hunger. Each mile was a testament to his resolve, a slow, painful pilgrimage towards an uncertain future. Meanwhile, back at the family estate, the father continued his daily vigil. Every morning, as the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky with hues of rose and gold, he would walk to the highest point of his property, often to the flat roof of his house or to a small rise overlooking the main road. He would stand there, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, his eyes scanning the winding path that led to the village and beyond, towards the world where his son had vanished. He did this not out of a desperate hope that his son would return that very day, but out of a deep, abiding longing, a ritual of remembrance and steadfast love. He would watch the dust motes dance in the morning light, listen to the distant sounds of shepherds calling their flocks, and feel the gentle breeze rustle through the olive trees, each sensation a quiet reminder of the passage of time, of days turning into weeks, and weeks into months, and months into seasons. He never spoke of his son's departure with bitterness or anger, at least not in front of others. His grief was a private affair, a quiet ache that resided deep within his heart. He continued to manage his estate with wisdom and care, overseeing the harvest of olives, the pressing of grapes for wine, the shearing of sheep, and the planting of new crops. He maintained the dignity and prosperity of his household, ensuring that his elder son had every resource he needed to continue the family legacy. Yet, a part of him, an essential part, remained tethered to the memory of his lost son, to the image of the young man who had once been so full of life and eager ambition. His servants, loyal and observant, noticed the subtle changes in their master. They saw the way his gaze lingered on the distant road, the way a sigh would sometimes escape his lips when he thought no one was listening. They knew the story of the younger son, of course, for such events were not easily kept secret in a close-knit community. Some might have whispered of the son's foolishness, of his ingratitude, perhaps even of the father's misplaced generosity. But the father, in his quiet strength, never entertained such talk. His love for his son remained an unwavering flame, burning steadily through the long, lonely nights and the endless days. One afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent towards the western hills, casting long shadows across the fields, the father was, as usual, standing at his customary vantage point. The air was warm and still, carrying the scent of drying herbs and the distant bleating of sheep. His eyes, though aged, were still keen, accustomed to discerning small details on the distant landscape. He watched the familiar figures of villagers returning from the market, their donkeys laden with goods, their voices carrying faintly on the breeze. He watched the shepherds guiding their flocks towards the safety of the pens for the night. Then, his gaze caught something different, a figure on the far horizon, moving slowly, hesitantly, along the dusty road. It was a lone figure, small and indistinct at first, but something about its gait, its weary posture, stirred a flicker of recognition deep within him. It was too far to be certain, too indistinct to be anything more than a fleeting impression, yet his heart gave a sudden, hopeful lurch. He squinted, trying to pierce the shimmering haze of the late afternoon sun. The figure was thin, almost skeletal, its clothes ragged and covered in dust, its head bowed. It was not the proud, well-dressed son who had left him so long ago. But a father's heart knows its own. A father's love sees beyond the outward appearance, beyond the years of separation, beyond the mistakes and the suffering. Even from a great distance, before the figure could be clearly identified by anyone else, before any of his servants could even discern it as a human form, the father knew. He knew it was his son. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow, a wave of emotion that swept away all the weariness, all the quiet sorrow, all the years of patient waiting. Without a moment's hesitation, without a thought for his own dignity or the propriety expected of a man of his standing, he began to run. He ran with an urgency that belied his age, his robes flapping around him, his sandals kicking up dust. He ran down the slope, past the olive trees, past the vineyards, his eyes never leaving the approaching figure. The servants, working in the fields or preparing for the evening meal, paused, startled by their master's uncharacteristic haste. They watched, bewildered, as the dignified patriarch of their household ran like a young man, his face alight with an emotion they had not seen in years. The son, still some distance away, was slowly making his way towards the estate, his eyes fixed on the familiar outlines of the buildings, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and faint hope. He was preparing his speech, rehearsing the words of repentance, bracing himself for the cold reception he fully expected. He saw a figure running towards him, but he could not yet make out who it was. Perhaps it was a servant, sent to turn him away, to tell him he was no longer welcome. He lowered his gaze, bracing himself for the inevitable rejection. But then, the figure was closer, much closer, and he could see the face, etched with age and emotion, yet unmistakably his father's. And his father was not walking, not approaching with a stern expression, but running towards him with an open embrace. The sight was overwhelming, shattering his carefully constructed defenses of shame and resignation. He had expected anger, disappointment, perhaps a cold, distant welcome, but never this. Never this unbridled, undignified rush of love. Before the son could even utter the first word of his carefully prepared confession, Before he could articulate his shame or his plea for mercy, his father reached him. The old man threw his arms around his son, pulling him into a tight embrace, holding him close, feeling the gauntness of his body, the rough texture of his tattered clothes, the dust and grime that clung to him. He kissed him repeatedly, not caring about the dirt or the smell, his tears mingling with the dust on his son's face. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated love, of profound relief, of forgiveness that transcended all words. The son, overwhelmed by this unexpected torrent of affection, began to stammer out his confession, the words tumbling out in a rush, just as he had rehearsed them in the pigsty. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." He tried to finish, to make his plea to be treated as a hired servant, to explain his unworthiness, but his father would not let him. The father interrupted him, not with a rebuke, but with a joyous command, his voice thick with emotion. Turning to the servants who had now gathered, their faces a mixture of astonishment and quiet understanding, the father's voice rang out, clear and strong, though still tinged with the emotion of the moment. "Quickly," he commanded, his eyes still fixed on his son, his hand still resting on his son's shoulder. "Bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead, and is alive again, he was lost, and is found." The servants, accustomed to obeying their master's every word, immediately sprang into action, their initial bewilderment giving way to a shared sense of joy. They understood the profound significance of these commands. The best robe, not just any robe, but the finest in the house, was a symbol of honor and restoration, a garment fit for a beloved son, not a hired hand. It would have been made of fine wool or linen, perhaps even dyed with a rich color, a stark contrast to the rags his son now wore. The ring, placed on his finger, was a sign of authority and family identity, a symbol that he was once again fully recognized as a son, with all the rights and privileges that entailed, perhaps even a signet ring, allowing him to conduct business in his father's name. And the sandals, not just any footwear, but a mark of a free man, a son, contrasting sharply with the bare, bruised feet of a slave or a destitute wanderer. The fatted calf, a young, specially nourished animal, kept for important occasions like weddings or significant feasts, was a costly sacrifice, a clear indication of the immense joy and importance of this reunion. It was not merely a meal, but a grand celebration, a public declaration of his son's return and his full restoration to the family. The preparations would begin at once, with the hurried movements of servants, the clatter of pottery, the rich aroma of roasting meat beginning to waft through the air, mingling with the sweet scent of fresh bread and the earthy smell of the olive groves. The news spread quickly throughout the household and into the nearby village. The lost son had returned. The one who had been given up for dead, who had squandered his inheritance and vanished into the distant lands, was now back. And his father, far from being angry or resentful, was celebrating his return with a feast of unprecedented scale. The sounds of joy and preparation filled the air, a vibrant symphony of life and renewed hope. Musicians would be called, their instruments tuned, ready to fill the evening with melodies of celebration. Dancers would prepare, their movements ready to express the exuberance of the moment. Meanwhile, the elder son was out in the field, diligently working just as he did every day. He was a man of routine, of responsibility, of unwavering dedication to his father and the family estate. He had spent his life laboring in the fields, overseeing the workers, ensuring the prosperity of the household. He had never asked for his inheritance, never strayed from his duties, always remaining faithful and obedient. As the day drew to a close, and the shadows lengthened, he began to make his way back towards the house, the familiar path worn smooth by countless journeys. The scent of the earth, the rustle of the leaves, the lowing of the cattle, these were the comforting sounds and smells of his world. But as he approached the house, something was different. The air was filled with an unusual commotion, a medley of sounds that were not part of the usual evening routine. He heard music, lively and joyous, the distinct sound of a lyre and a flute, accompanied by the rhythmic beat of drums. He heard singing, and the boisterous laughter of many voices, a sound of revelry that was quite uncharacteristic of his father's usually quiet and orderly household. A sense of unease, a subtle prickle of curiosity, began to stir within him. He quickened his pace, wondering what extraordinary event could be taking place. He called one of the servants who was hurrying past, perhaps carrying a platter of food or a jug of wine, and asked, his voice tinged with a mix of confusion and mild irritation, "What is happening? What do these things mean?" The servant, flushed with excitement and the general merriment, quickly explained, his words tumbling out in a rush, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him back safe and sound." The words hit the elder son like a physical blow. His brother, the one who had taken his share of the inheritance, who had abandoned his family, who had squandered everything in a distant land, was back. And not only was he back, but his father, the very man he had offended, was celebrating his return with a feast, killing the fatted calf, an honor usually reserved for the most significant occasions. All the years of his own faithful service, his tireless labor, his unwavering loyalty, seemed to flash before his eyes, suddenly diminished, suddenly unappreciated in the face of this extravagant welcome for his wayward brother. A wave of anger, hot and fierce, surged through him. It was an anger born of perceived injustice, of a deep-seated resentment that had perhaps simmered beneath the surface for years, now brought to a boiling point. He felt a profound sense of betrayal, not just by his brother, but by his father. How could his father be so joyous, so forgiving, so utterly extravagant in his welcome, for a son who had brought nothing but shame and dishonor upon the family? He refused to go in. He stood outside the house, his arms crossed, his jaw set, the sounds of celebration now grating on his ears, each note of music, each peal of laughter, a fresh affront. He would not join the revelry. He would not partake in this celebration of his brother's return, not when he felt so deeply wronged. The thought of facing his brother, of seeing him dressed in the best robe, adorned with a ring, sitting at the place of honor, was unbearable. His father, hearing that his elder son was outside and refusing to join the feast, immediately came out to him. The father, still radiant with the joy of his younger son's return, now approached his elder son with a gentle, pleading demeanor. He knew his elder son's heart, his sense of duty, his strict adherence to what was right and just. He understood, perhaps, the bitterness that now clouded his son's face. He began to entreat him, to reason with him, to invite him to share in the joy, to understand the depth of his own heart. But the elder son, blinded by his anger and hurt, would not be swayed. He burst out, his voice sharp with accusation, "Look! These many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat, that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." The words tumbled out, a bitter litany of grievances, revealing the depth of his resentment. He emphasized this son of yours, a deliberate distancing, refusing to acknowledge his brother as his own. He painted a picture of his brother's profligacy, of his moral failings, perhaps even exaggerating the details, his anger fueling his words. He felt that his own steadfast loyalty had been overlooked, his years of hard work unrewarded, while his irresponsible brother was now being showered with undeserved favor. He saw only the injustice, the imbalance, the perceived slight against his own unwavering devotion. He had diligently followed every rule, every expectation, and for what? To see his wayward brother welcomed back with such fanfare, while he, the faithful son, had never been given even a young goat for a celebration with his friends. The contrast was unbearable, a sharp pain in his heart. The father listened patiently, his gaze soft, full of understanding, yet tinged with a quiet sorrow. He did not interrupt, allowing his son to vent the full measure of his frustration and anger. When the elder son had finished, the father responded, his voice gentle and calm, filled with an abiding love that encompassed both his sons, a love that sought to heal the rift between them. He addressed his elder son not with rebuke, but with tenderness, reminding him of his cherished place within the family, of the continuous, unbroken bond they shared. "Son," he began, his voice a soothing balm against the elder son's agitated spirit, "you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours." He spoke of the elder son's constant presence, his unwavering loyalty, the secure and honored place he held within the household. He reminded him that he was not just a servant, but a son and heir, with full access to all the wealth and resources of the estate. Everything the father possessed, everything he had built, was ultimately destined for his elder son. There was no need for a special gift, a young goat, because the entire estate, the entire legacy, was already his. He had never been deprived, never overlooked. He had always been within the circle of his father's love and provision. Then, the father explained the profound reason for the celebration, seeking to open his elder son's heart to the same joy that filled his own. "It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead, and is alive again, he was lost, and is found." He used the same words he had used earlier to his servants, but now he addressed them directly to his elder son, emphasizing the profound transformation, the miraculous return from what felt like death. He spoke of the younger son not as "this son of yours," but as "this your brother," a gentle reminder of their shared blood, their unbreakable familial bond. He highlighted the spiritual death and rebirth, the profound loss and joyous recovery that had taken place. The father's words hung in the air, a quiet plea for understanding, for empathy, for a shared sense of joy in the face of such a profound restoration. He wanted his elder son to see beyond the perceived injustice, beyond the financial loss, and to embrace the miracle of life returned, of a family made whole again. He wanted him to understand that true wealth was not just in possessions, but in the presence of loved ones, in the mending of broken relationships. The celebration was not a reward for past misdeeds, but a spontaneous outpouring of gratitude for a life redeemed, a son returned from the brink. It was an expression of unconditional love, a love that rejoiced not in what was deserved, but in what was possible, in the profound grace of a second chance. The scene remains, suspended in time, the father standing outside the house, his arms outstretched, his heart open, pleading with his elder son to join the celebration, to let go of his anger and embrace the joy of reunion. The sounds of music and laughter drift from within the house, a vibrant backdrop to this quiet, poignant confrontation. The aroma of roasting meat fills the evening air, a scent of abundance and celebration, a stark contrast to the elder son's bitter heart. The stars begin to prickle the deepening twilight sky, one by one, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama of family, forgiveness, and the complex tapestry of human emotions. The father's gaze, full of unwavering love and a quiet yearning, rests on his elder son, hoping, waiting, for his heart to soften, for him to step out of the shadows of resentment and into the warmth of shared joy, under the vast, silent expanse of the deepening night, where the gentle breeze rustles through the leaves of the olive trees, carrying the faint, sweet scent of jasmine and the distant murmur of the village settling into its evening rhythm. As the last vestiges of daylight fade from the western horizon, leaving behind a sky of deep, velvety blue, punctuated by the growing brilliance of the celestial spheres, each one a tiny beacon in the immensity of the cosmos, reflecting the quiet hope in the Father's patient eyes, a hope that transcends all time and all circumstance, a hope that continues to burn brightly, like a steadfast lamp in the gathering darkness, illuminating the path towards reconciliation, towards understanding, towards the complete embrace of family, under the silent, watchful gaze of the ancient hills, and the timeless, endless rhythm of the world. And the timeless, endless rhythm of the world, where days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, each one carrying the young son further and further from the familiar, comforting scent of his father's fields, and the sturdy, unyielding embrace of his family's ancient olive trees. He had journeyed far, perhaps along the well-worn trade routes that snaked through the fertile crescent, past bustling caravans laden with spices and textiles, past sun-baked villages where the chatter of foreign tongues filled the dusty air, his initial excitement slowly giving way to a more pragmatic, almost weary determination. The coins, once a glittering promise of boundless freedom, had begun to dwindle, each transaction a small erosion of his inheritance, each indulgence a fleeting pleasure that left behind a hollow echo. He had sought out a distant country, a place where the customs were different, where the faces were unfamiliar, and where, he might have imagined, the judgments of his past choices would not follow him like a shadow. In this far-off land, perhaps a bustling Hellenistic city with its grand theatres and public baths, its vibrant markets overflowing with exotic fruits and finely crafted pottery, he had spent his fortune, leaving, as the ancient texts describe, prodigally. This word, in its original sense, speaks not merely of wastefulness, but of an extravagant, almost reckless abandon, a lavishness that knew no bounds, a spending that was heedless of future consequences. He would have found companions easily enough in such a place, drawn to his ready purse and his youthful exuberance, individuals who delighted in the fleeting pleasures of the moment, sharing in the feasts and the laughter, their voices echoing in the warm, lamplit nights. Imagine the clinking of wine cups, perhaps made of finely worked bronze or even fragile glass, the rich aroma of roasted meat seasoned with spices unknown in his homeland, the sweet, heady scent of perfumes mingling with the smoke from oil lamps and cooking fires. He might have frequented establishments where musicians played lively tunes on lyres and flutes, their melodies weaving through the boisterous conversations, the air thick with the murmur of many voices, the rustle of fine garments, and the soft, rhythmic tapping of sandals on polished stone floors. Each day would have brought new diversions, new experiences, new ways to spend the silver and gold that had once represented generations of careful stewardship. He might have purchased vibrant cloaks dyed with expensive Tyrian purple, or gambled away sums on games of chance in dimly lit taverns, the tension palpable as dice clattered against wooden tables, fortunes won and lost in a single breath. He would have felt, perhaps, a thrilling sense of independence, a liberation from the structured rhythms of his father's household, where every sunrise brought the expectation of labor in the fields, and every sunset a quiet meal shared with familiar faces. Here, in this distant land, he was his own master, accountable to no one, free to pursue every whim, every fleeting desire that arose within him. The days would have blurred into a kaleidoscope of sensory overload, a constant pursuit of novelty and pleasure, each new experience pushing the memory of his home just a little further into the background, a faint, almost forgotten melody. But even the deepest wells of wealth can run dry, especially when drawn from with such relentless abandon. The coins, once so numerous they felt inexhaustible, began to thin out, their weight in his purse growing lighter with each passing week. The lavish feasts grew smaller, the companions fewer, their laughter less hearty, their attention drifting towards others who still possessed the means to entertain. The fine garments might have grown worn, the novelty of his exotic purchases fading, leaving behind only the stark reality of diminishing resources. And then, as if fate itself conspired to amplify his predicament, a severe famine struck the distant country. The ancient world was often vulnerable to such calamities, a sudden blight on crops, a prolonged drought, or an unexpected pestilence could quickly transform abundance into scarcity, turning bustling markets into hushed, anxious spaces. The price of grain, the very staff of life, would have soared, making even the simplest meal a luxury. In such times, those without land, without family networks, without established roots, were the first to suffer, the most vulnerable to the harsh realities of survival. The young man, stripped of his wealth and his fair-weather friends, found himself utterly alone, adrift in a foreign land where no one knew his name, no one cared for his plight. The vibrant city, once a playground of endless delights, now seemed cold and indifferent, its grand architecture mocking his destitution. The sweet scents of exotic foods were replaced by the sharp, acrid smell of hunger, the soft murmur of conversations by the gnawing emptiness in his own stomach. He would have felt the chill of the nights more keenly, the sun's glare by day more oppressive, his body growing thinner, his clothes growing shabbier, his once confident stride replaced by a weary shuffle. Desperate, with hunger a constant, insistent companion, he sought out work, any work that would offer him a morsel of food, a temporary reprieve from the gnawing emptiness. In a land where he was an outsider, with no particular skills beyond those of a farmer, and perhaps a certain youthful charm that had long since faded, options would have been severely limited. He might have approached various landowners, his voice perhaps a little hoarse, his eyes downcast, the shame of his situation a heavy cloak upon him. Finally, he found a position, a truly low and degrading one for a young man from a respectable Jewish family, especially one who had grown up in a land where pigs were considered unclean animals. He hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, a man who, perhaps seeing his desperation, offered him the only work available, tending swine. Imagine the dusty, sun-baked fields, far from the city's grandeur, where the air hung heavy with the earthy, pungent smell of the pigs, a smell that would cling to his clothes, his hair, his very skin. He would have spent his days in the company of these animals, their grunts and snuffles the only sounds breaking the monotonous silence, their muddy wallows and coarse hair a stark contrast to the silks and fine linens he had once known. His task would have been to feed them, to guide them to pasture, to keep them from straying, perhaps even to clean their pens. His hands, once accustomed to the soft feel of coins and fine fabrics, now calloused and stained. The food he was given, if any, would have been meager, barely enough to sustain him. The scripture tells us that he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating. These pods were likely carob pods, a common animal feed in the ancient Near East, sweet but coarse, often used for livestock. For a human, they would offer little sustenance, a desperate last resort. Picture him, sitting in the shade of a gnarled olive tree or a scraggly carob tree, his stomach rumbling, watching the pigs contentedly crunching on the pods, their simple needs met, while his own hunger gnawed at him relentlessly. The shame and humiliation would have been immense, a suffocating weight upon his spirit. He, a son of a wealthy landowner, now reduced to this, to envying the food of pigs in a foreign land. The sun would beat down mercilessly, the dust would rise with every movement of the animals, and the days would stretch out, long and arduous, each one a stark reminder of how far he had fallen, how completely he had squandered his inheritance, his dignity, his very sense of self. The memories of his father's house, once pushed aside by the clamor of his new life, would now begin to resurface, no longer as faint echoes, but as sharp, poignant pangs of regret. It was in this profound state of destitution, surrounded by the grunting pigs and the relentless hunger, that he finally came to his senses. This phrase, in the original Greek, implies a moment of profound clarity, an awakening from a long, self-imposed delusion. It was not a sudden burst of inspiration, perhaps, but a slow, dawning realization, a quiet turning inward amidst the squalor. He would have begun to reflect, perhaps during the long, lonely nights under a sky filled with unfamiliar stars, or during the monotonous hours of watching the swine. He would have compared his present misery with the abundance he had so carelessly abandoned. He began to think, with a clarity sharpened by hunger and despair, of his father's household, not just of the comfort, but of the people. He remembered the hired servants, those who worked for wages, who were not even part of the family, yet they had more than enough to eat. Their tables, even in their humble dwellings, would have been laden with bread, with olives, with cheese, with the simple, wholesome food of the land. They had shelter, they had clothing, they had a measure of security. And here he was, the son, starving in a foreign land, longing for the scraps that even the pigs disdained. The irony, the bitter, stinging irony, would have been almost unbearable. A plan, born of desperation and a glimmer of hope, began to form in his mind, slowly, carefully, like a fragile seed taking root in parched earth. he resolved to return home, not with the swagger of a prodigal son, but with the humility of a penitent. He knew he could not expect to be received as a son, not after what he had done, not after the shame he had brought upon his family. The cultural expectations of the time were clear. Such an act of disrespect, of demanding one's inheritance prematurely and then squandering it, was a profound offense, a public shaming of the family. He would have been considered dead to them, metaphorically if not literally. So, he rehearsed his words, perhaps whispering them to himself in the quiet of the night, or muttering them as he walked among the pigs, the pungent air a stark contrast to the words of repentance forming on his lips. "Father," he would say, "I have sinned against heaven and against you." This was a carefully chosen phrase, acknowledging both his spiritual transgression against God and his moral failing against his earthly father. He understood the gravity of his actions, the depth of his disrespect. "I am no longer worthy to be called your son." This admission would have been incredibly difficult, a stripping away of his identity, a surrender of his birthright. He would have felt the weight of those words, the profound sense of loss and regret they carried. His plea would be simple, direct, born of genuine remorse and a desperate need for survival: "Make me like one of your hired servants." He was not asking for forgiveness, not yet, not explicitly. He was asking for a chance to work, to earn his keep, to simply exist within the periphery of his former life, to be granted the basic necessities that even the lowest members of his father's household enjoyed. He would have imagined the long journey back, the dust on the roads, the familiar landmarks appearing one by one, each one stirring a complex mix of fear and longing within him. He would have pictured his father's face, perhaps stern, perhaps sorrowful, perhaps filled with a righteous anger. The thought of facing him after all this time, after all his foolishness, would have been daunting, a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. Yet, the alternative, starvation and utter degradation in a foreign land, was far worse. The faint, persistent image of his father's house, with its hearth fire, its familiar smells, its promise of food and shelter, pulled him forward, a magnetic force drawing him back from the brink of despair. He would have gathered what little strength he had left, perhaps a small, tattered bundle containing his few remaining possessions, and turned his face towards home, towards the distant hills that marked the boundary of his father's land, each step a testament to his newfound humility and a desperate, fragile hope for redemption, for a sliver of mercy, for the quiet dignity of a servant's life. A life far removed from the lavish wastefulness of his past, but a life nonetheless, a chance to simply be. The sun would have risen, casting long shadows across the dusty path, marking the beginning of a long and arduous journey, a journey filled with uncertainty, with fear, but also with the quiet, persistent flicker of a new resolve, a resolve to return, to face the consequences, to seek a place, any place, within the familiar embrace of his family's ancient, enduring home. His steps, once so eager and light as he departed, now dragged heavily through the dust of the Roman road, each footfall a dull, rhythmic thud that echoed the slow, steady beat of his own chastened heart. The sun, which had once seemed to shine with such a brilliant promise on his outward journey, now beat down upon his head with an oppressive, unyielding heat, baking the very air he breathed and turning the distant hills into shimmering, indistinct mirages. He had shed the fine clothes he once wore, trading them piece by piece for meager meals or a night's shelter in some squalid caravanserai, until now he was clad in little more than tattered rags, the coarse fabric scratching against his sun-scorched skin, a constant, irritating reminder of his fallen state. The scent of the road was a complex tapestry of dry earth, the acrid smoke from distant cooking fires, the faint, metallic tang of sweat, and the pungent, unmistakable odor of unwashed bodies and weary animals. He walked mostly in silence, his gaze fixed on the endless ribbon of road stretching before him, occasionally lifting his eyes to scan the horizon, a faint, almost imperceptible hope stirring within him that he might glimpse something familiar, some landmark that would signal his proximity to the land he had so carelessly abandoned. The sounds of the journey were a monotonous symphony, the distant bleating of sheep, the persistent buzz of flies, the creak of wooden cartwheels on the uneven track, the murmur of foreign tongues from passing travelers who barely spared him a glance, seeing only another destitute wanderer among the many who crisscrossed the ancient world. He remembered the crisp, clean air of his father's fields, the sweet scent of olive trees after a spring rain, the comforting lowing of the cattle in the twilight, the gentle clatter of pottery from the kitchen at meal times. All these memories, once pushed aside, now returned with a poignant clarity, each one a small, sharp ache in his chest. Days bled into weeks, and weeks into months, the passage of time marked by the gradual deepening of the lines on his face, the increasing gauntness of his frame, and the growing weariness in his eyes. He ate what he could find, often sharing scraps with stray dogs or foraging for wild figs along the roadside, the taste of the meager food often bitter with the dust of his journey and the shame of his circumstances. Nights were spent beneath the vast, indifferent canopy of stars, or huddled in the lee of some ancient ruin, the cold ground a stark contrast to the warmth of his childhood bed. He would often leave awake, listening to the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a jackal, his mind replaying the foolish choices he had made, each memory a fresh wave of regret washing over him. He imagined his father, sitting by the hearth, perhaps looking out over the fields, his face etched with a quiet sorrow, and the thought was a torment, yet also a strange comfort, a tether to the home he yearned for. Meanwhile, back in the familiar landscape of Judea, the father continued his daily vigil. Each morning, as the first blush of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold, he would rise from his bed, the chill of the early air a familiar sensation against his skin. He would perform his morning prayers, his voice a low, resonant murmur in the quiet house, then step outside, his gaze instinctively drawn to the winding path that led away from their family compound, disappearing over the distant rise. The sun would climb higher, casting long, slender shadows across the olive groves and vineyards, and the father would often find himself standing there, a silent sentinel, his eyes scanning the horizon, searching for a familiar silhouette, a sign, any sign, of his lost son. He would spend his days overseeing the household, directing the servants, tending to the flocks, discussing the harvest with his trusted stewards, his movements deliberate and unhurried, yet beneath the calm exterior, there was a quiet, persistent ache, a space in his heart that remained empty. The scent of freshly baked bread from the kitchen, the earthy aroma of the tilled soil, the sweet fragrance of jasmine blooming near the courtyard wall, all these familiar sensations, once simply part of the fabric of his life, now carried a subtle undertone of longing, a reminder of the son who was absent from their midst. He would often sit on the stone bench outside the house in the late afternoon, the warmth of the sun on his face, the gentle breeze rustling through the leaves of the fig tree, his gaze still fixed on the road, as if willing his son's return into existence. The other villagers, those who had known the family for generations, would sometimes approach him with hushed words of sympathy, their faces etched with a shared understanding of his sorrow. They knew the story, the rash departure, the squandered inheritance, the painful silence that had followed. They would offer condolences, perhaps a quiet word about the unpredictability of youth, or the harshness of the world beyond their valley, but the father would simply nod, a polite, distant smile on his lips, his eyes always returning to the empty road. He never spoke ill of his son, never indulged in bitter recriminations, never allowed the gossip of the marketplace to taint his quiet hope. Instead, he simply waited, his patience a deep, unwavering wellspring, his love an enduring flame that no amount of distance or time could extinguish. As the seasons turned, the landscape around the family home transformed. The vibrant green of spring gave way to the golden hues of summer, then the rich reds and browns of autumn, and finally the stark, quiet beauty of winter. Each change brought with it a fresh wave of memories, a poignant recollection of past festivals, of shared laughter, of the son's youthful energy in the fields. The father would remember teaching his son to sow seeds, to prune the vines, to negotiate with merchants in the bustling market town, his voice a gentle guide, his hand a steady presence. He would recall the boy's bright eyes, his quick wit, his youthful exuberance, and a soft, melancholic smile would touch his lips. He never gave up hope, not truly. Deep within him, a quiet certainty persisted, a father's intuition that one day, his son would find his way back, no matter how long the journey, no matter how great the distance. Back on the road, the prodigal son pushed onward, his body aching, his spirit humbled. He had long since exhausted the last of his meager resources, and the gnawing hunger in his belly was a constant companion. He had taken on odd jobs when he could find them, his once soft hands now calloused and rough from manual labor, his back bent from carrying heavy loads. He had learned the bitter taste of charity, the sting of disdain in the eyes of strangers, the cold indifference of a world that had no place for a man who had squandered all he had. The memory of the pig's husks, the coarse, unpalatable food he had once envied, now served as a stark reminder of the depths to which he had fallen, a constant, visceral motivator to keep moving, to keep pushing towards home. He thought of his father's servants, those who worked the fields and tended the animals, men and women who had always been treated with kindness and respect in his father's household. He remembered their comfortable living quarters, the regular meals, the security of their employment, and the thought brought a fresh wave of shame. Even they, the lowest in his father's house, were better off than he was now, a destitute wanderer, a beggar on the roadside. The realization was a heavy weight in his chest, yet it also sparked a new, fragile determination. He would go back, not as a son, not even as a hired hand, but as a penitent, a man seeking only a place, any place, within the familiar walls of his childhood home, a place where he could at least earn his bread and perhaps, in time, begin to atone for his folly. The landscape began to shift subtly as he approached the familiar regions of Judea. The air grew drier, the hills more rugged, dotted with ancient olive trees whose gnarled trunks spoke of centuries of patient endurance. He started to recognize the distant contours of mountains, the familiar patterns of terraced fields, the subtle changes in the quality of the light as the sun tracked across the sky. The scent of the air changed too, carrying faint, familiar notes of wood smoke, sun-baked earth, and the distant, comforting aroma of baking bread. His heart, which had felt like a heavy stone for so long, now began to beat with a faint, nervous flutter, a mixture of apprehension and a burgeoning, almost unbearable hope. He walked with a renewed urgency, his eyes now constantly scanning the horizon, searching for any sign, any landmark that would confirm his proximity to home. He passed small villages, their stone houses clustered together, the sounds of children playing, of women chatting by the well, of men calling out to one another, all familiar echoes from a life he had once known. He avoided eye contact, his head bowed, his tattered clothes a testament to his shame, fearing recognition, fearing the judgment in the eyes of those who might remember him as the proud, foolish young man who had once ridden out of town with such a flourish. One afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent towards the western horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the land, he crested a familiar hill. His breath caught in his throat. Below him, nestled in the valley, lay the familiar cluster of buildings, the dark green of the olive groves, the lighter green of the vineyards, and in the center, unmistakable, the solid, comforting shape of his father's house. A wave of emotion, so powerful it almost buckled his knees, washed over him, a complex blend of relief, fear, longing, and an overwhelming sense of unworthiness. He stood there for a long moment, simply gazing, allowing the sight to wash over him, to imprint itself on his weary soul. The sounds of the valley drifted up to him, the distant bleating of sheep, the lowing of cattle, the faint, comforting murmur of human activity, all weaving together into a tapestry of home. He took a deep, shaky breath, the air filling his lungs with the familiar scent of his homeland, and began the final descent, his steps slow and deliberate, each one bringing him closer to the reckoning he both dreaded and yearned for. His mind raced, rehearsing the words he would say, the humble plea he would offer, the confession of his unworthiness. He imagined his father's reaction, perhaps anger, perhaps disappointment, perhaps a cold, distant acceptance of his return as a mere servant. He prepared himself for the worst, for he felt he deserved nothing less. Meanwhile, the father, as was his custom, sat on the stone bench outside his house, his gaze fixed on the road that wound over the distant hill. The late afternoon sun warmed his face, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the fig tree above him. He watched the road, as he had done countless times before, his heart holding that quiet, persistent hope, that unwavering certainty. He saw a figure appear on the crest of the hill, a small, distant silhouette against the fading light. It was a common sight, travelers often passed this way, but something in the way this figure moved, a certain gait, a familiar slump of the shoulders, stirred a deeper recognition within him. His eyes, though aged, were keen, sharpened by years of watching, of waiting. His heart began to pound with a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He squinted, trying to discern more detail, and as the figure drew a little closer, descending the slope, the tattered clothes, the weary posture, the unmistakable outline of his son, became clear. A gasp escaped his lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated recognition and overwhelming emotion. He did not hesitate, did not pause to consider the years of absence, the squandered wealth, the shame. All that mattered was that his son, his lost son, was there, on the road, coming home. He rose from the bench with a sudden, almost youthful agility, his old bones protesting only for a moment. His eyes, brimming with tears he didn't even realize were forming, never left the approaching figure. He began to run, a sight that must have startled the servants who were going about their evening chores, for they had never seen their master move with such speed, such desperate urgency. His robe flapped around his legs, his sandals kicked up dust, and his breath came in short, ragged gasps, but he paid no mind. His gaze was fixed, his purpose singular, to reach his son. The son, still some distance away, saw his father running towards him. He saw the outstretched arms, the face etched with a mixture of joy and tears, and a fresh wave of emotion, this time not of shame but of profound, overwhelming relief and love, washed over him. He stopped, his rehearsed words forgotten, his carefully constructed plea dissolving into the dusty air. He could only stand there, watching his father, his heart aching with a tenderness he hadn't felt in years, a feeling that was both exquisitely painful and utterly, wonderfully familiar. The distance between them closed rapidly, the father's steps swift and sure, the son standing still, rooted to the spot, tears now streaming down his own dust-streaked face. The air shimmered with the golden light of the setting sun, and the quiet sounds of the valley seemed to hold their breath, as if in anticipation of this long-awaited moment, this profound reunion, this embrace that would bridge years of separation, of sorrow, of silent yearning. The father's embrace was not merely a physical act, it was a tapestry woven from years of patient longing, of quiet prayers whispered into the cool night air, of countless glances down the dusty road at every approaching figure. His arms, strong yet trembling with an emotion that had been held captive for so long, wrapped around his son's shoulders, pulling the emaciated frame close, feeling the sharp angles of bone beneath the threadbare fabric, the rough texture of the sun-baked skin. The son, for his part, buried his face into the familiar, comforting scent of his father's tunic, to a mixture of olive oil, the faint aroma of the sheepfold, and something else, something uniquely paternal, that had been a distant memory for so long it felt almost like a dream. He felt the steady beat of his father's heart against his ear, a rhythm that spoke of unwavering love, and a profound sense of relief, a loosening of the tight knot of shame and despair that had resided in his chest for what felt like an eternity, began to spread through his weary limbs. The servants, who had been tending to their evening chores, some leading the last few sheep into the fold, others drawing water from the well, paused in their tasks, their eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and understanding. They had known the story of the younger son, of course. Tales travel quickly in a household, especially those involving such a dramatic departure and the subsequent quiet sorrow that had settled over their master. They had seen the father's daily vigil, the way his gaze would drift to the horizon, a silent question in his eyes. Now, to witness this moment, this raw outpouring of affection, was to see a long-held hope finally bloom into reality. The air around them seemed to hum with the unspoken joy of the father, a joy so potent it was almost palpable, radiating outwards like the warmth from a newly kindled fire. The son, still held tightly within his father's embrace, finally found his voice, a ragged whisper that was barely audible above the quiet rustle of the evening breeze through the olive trees. "Father," he began, his voice thick with unshed tears, "I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son." The words, rehearsed countless times during his solitary journey, during those long, hungry nights spent under the indifferent stars, now felt inadequate, a pale reflection of the true depth of his remorse. He had imagined this moment, had envisioned his father's stern face, perhaps a look of disappointment, or even anger, but never this overwhelming tenderness, this unconditional acceptance that seemed to wash over him like a cool, cleansing stream. But the father, still holding him close, gently interrupted, his voice soft yet firm, carrying the weight of his authority and the boundless depth of his love. He looked past the words of unworthiness, past the tattered clothing and the gaunt face, and saw only his son, the child he had loved from the moment of his birth. He turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the assembled servants, some of whom were now beginning to approach, drawn by the unfolding drama. Quickly, he commanded, his voice gaining a quiet urgency, "Bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet." The servants, accustomed to their master's quiet demeanor, moved with a sudden alacrity. The best robe would have been a garment reserved for special occasions, perhaps made of finer wool, dyed a richer color, perhaps even embroidered with subtle patterns that spoke of the family's standing in the community. It was not merely a covering for his son's nakedness, but a symbol of restoration, a public declaration that he was not merely a returning servant, but a cherished member of the household, restored to his rightful place. To wear such a robe was to wear the family's honor, to be reclothed in dignity. One servant, a younger man who had grown up in the household and remembered the prodigal son as a lively, sometimes mischievous boy, hurried towards the main house, his sandals kicking up small puffs of dust. Another, an older woman with kind eyes, moved towards the storage room where the family's more precious items were kept. The ring, too, was significant. In that culture, a signet ring was often used to seal documents, to signify authority and trust. To place a ring on his son's hand was to bestow upon him a measure of his former status, to acknowledge him as a son with rights and privileges, not a hired hand. It was a tangible mark of identity, a reversal of the years of anonymity and degradation. And the sandals. The son had walked barefoot for who knew how long, his feet calloused and cracked from the unforgiving roads, a common sign of a beggar or a slave. To provide sandals was to lift him from that lowest station, to offer comfort and protection, to affirm his freedom and his place as a beloved family member. These were not mere practical items, they were deliberate, symbolic gestures, each one carefully chosen by the father to communicate a profound message of unconditional acceptance and complete restoration. As the servants dispersed to fulfill their master's commands, the father continued to hold his son, his hand gently stroking the back of his head, a gesture of comfort and reassurance. He could feel the tremors still running through his son's body, the lingering effects of exhaustion, hunger, and the emotional weight of his return. He knew that words alone, no matter how heartfelt, could not fully convey the depth of his forgiveness, the completeness of his joy. Actions, especially in that culture, often spoke louder and more clearly than any spoken declaration. "And bring the fattened calf and kill it," the father continued, his voice now imbued with a quiet excitement, "and let us eat and celebrate." The fattened calf was not just any animal. It was an animal specifically chosen and set aside, fed a special diet, perhaps grain-fed, to ensure its meat would be tender and rich. Such a calf would only be slaughtered for a truly momentous occasion, a significant feast that would gather family, friends, and neighbors. This was not a quick meal, This was a celebration, a public declaration of joy and thanksgiving. The aroma of roasting meat, the sounds of music and laughter would fill the air, signaling to the entire community that something extraordinary had happened. The preparations would begin immediately. The calf would be led from its pen, its fate sealed by the father's command. The butchering would be a skilled task, carried out by experienced hands, perhaps one of the older servants or even the father himself, overseeing the process. The meat would be prepared for roasting, perhaps over an open fire, the scent of wood smoke mingling with the rich aroma of the cooking meat. Women from the household would begin preparing other dishes to flatbreads baked in the taban oven, fresh olives, dried figs, perhaps some honey, and pitchers of cool water, and wine from the family's own vineyards. The household, which had been overshadowed by a quiet melancholy for so long, was now to be transformed into a hub of joyous activity. "For this my son was dead, and is alive again," the father declared, his voice filled with a profound sense of wonder and gratitude. "He was lost, and is found." These words, simple yet deeply resonant, encapsulated the father's perspective. He saw not a wayward youth who had squandered his inheritance, but a son who had been lost to him, as if to death itself, and was now miraculously restored. The theological implications of dead and live again would have been understood by his listeners as a spiritual rebirth, a return from a state of separation and alienation to one of communion and life. It was a metaphor that spoke to the very core of human experience, of loss and recovery, of despair and hope. And so, the celebration began. The news would spread quickly through the village. Neighbors, hearing the sounds of merriment, seeing the smoke rising from the father's courtyard, would begin to gather. It was customary in that culture to share in the joys and sorrows of one's community. A feast of this magnitude would draw many, and the father, in his generosity, would welcome them all. The courtyard would be lit by oil lamps and perhaps torches, casting flickering shadows on the ancient stone walls. The air would fill with the murmur of voices, the laughter of children, the clinking of earthenware cups, and the melodic strains of a lyre or a flute, played by one of the servants or perhaps a guest. The son, now bathed and clothed in the finest robe, the signet ring gleaming on his finger, and new sandals on his feet, would be led to a place of honor at the feast. He would feel the soft fabric of the robe against his skin, a stark contrast to the rough, worn rags he had shed. The weight of the ring on his finger would be a constant reminder of his restored identity. He would look around at the faces, some familiar from his childhood, others new, and he would see not judgment, but warmth, curiosity, and perhaps a shared sense of wonder at this miraculous return. He would eat, slowly at first, savoring each bite of the tender meat, the fresh bread, the sweet dates, his body gradually absorbing the nourishment it had so desperately craved. The taste of home, the familiar flavors, would be a comfort to his soul, a tangible sign that he was truly back where he belonged. He would listen to the stories, the quiet conversations, the sounds of life continuing, thriving, within the protective embrace of his father's home. The shame, though not entirely erased, would begin to recede, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude and a quiet, burgeoning hope for the future. Meanwhile, the elder son was out in the field, diligently working, as he always did. He was a man of routine, of responsibility, of unwavering dedication to his father and the family estate. He had spent his days toiling under the Mediterranean sun, overseeing the labors, ensuring the crops were tended, the vineyards pruned, the flocks pastured. His life was one of steady, predictable effort, a stark contrast to the tumultuous journey of his younger brother. He had likely heard whispers of his brother's wild leaving, of the squandered inheritance, and while he might have felt a pang of sorrow for his father, he probably also felt a quiet sense of vindication, a confirmation of his own steadfastness. As evening approached, the elder son began his walk back to the house, the familiar path winding through the fields. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the olive groves. The air was cooling, carrying the scent of dry earth and ripening grain. As he drew closer to the homestead, he began to hear sounds that were unusual for a typical evening. There was music, distinct and lively, carried on the gentle breeze. And laughter, not the usual subdued chatter of the household, but boisterous, unrestrained merriment. The smell of roasting meat, rich and savory, also reached him, a scent usually reserved for the most important festivals or celebrations. A frown creased his brow. This was unexpected. He knew of no special occasion, no wedding, no harvest festival that warranted such a lavish display. His mind, ever practical and orderly, began to search for an explanation. He quickened his pace, a sense of unease beginning to stir within him. As he neared the house, he saw the flickering lights, the shadows of many people moving in the courtyard, and the unmistakable signs of a grand feast in full swing. He called out to one of the servants, a young man who was hurrying past, perhaps carrying a pitcher of wine or a tray of food. "What is going on here?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of impatience, perhaps even a touch of annoyance. He was tired from his day's labor, and this unexpected revelry was jarring to his orderly sensibilities. He expected an explanation, a reason for this deviation from the usual quiet evening routine. The servant, his face alight with excitement, turned to him, perhaps a little breathless from his exertions. "Your brother has come," he exclaimed, his voice filled with genuine joy. "And your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound." The words hit the elder son like a physical blow. His brother, back, safe and sound, and a fattened calf? All for him? The news, instead of bringing joy, ignited a slow burn of anger within him. All the years of his diligent service, his unwavering loyalty, his quiet sacrifices, suddenly seemed to diminish in the face of this extravagant welcome for a brother who had squandered everything. The injustice of it, as he perceived it, began to fester. He refused to go in. The idea of joining a celebration for someone who had brought shame and sorrow upon the family, who had wasted his inheritance on dissolute leaving, was utterly repugnant to him. He stood outside the festive courtyard, his arms crossed, his jaw tight, the sounds of merriment now grating on his ears. The music, which a moment ago had been merely surprising, now felt like a mocking tune, a testament to his father's perceived favoritism. His father, hearing of his elder son's refusal to join the feast, came out to him. The father, still radiating the joy of his younger son's return, would have approached his elder son with tenderness, perhaps a hand on his shoulder, a gentle word. He would have seen the anger etched on his son's face, the stiff posture, the resentment simmering beneath the surface. He would have understood, to some degree, the source of this anger, but his heart, overflowing with gratitude for the return of his lost son, could not fully comprehend the depth of his elder son's bitterness. "Son," the father began, his voice soft and persuasive, "why do you not come in and join us?" He would have wanted his elder son to share in the joy, to be part of the family's complete restoration. He would have yearned for both his sons to be united in celebration, to mend the unspoken rift that had always existed between them, a rift now exacerbated by the younger son's return. But the elder son, his anger now boiling over, poured out his grievances, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Look," he exclaimed, his gesture perhaps sweeping towards the noisy courtyard, "these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command." His words were a torrent of self-pity and accusation, a recounting of his own impeccable record, a stark contrast to his brother's perceived failings. He felt unseen, unappreciated, his years of faithful service overshadowed by a single act of forgiveness. "Yet you never gave me a young goat, that I might celebrate with my friends," he continued, his voice laced with bitterness. A young goat was a much smaller, less significant animal than a fattened calf, suitable for a modest celebration with a few friends. His complaint was not merely about the lack of a feast, but about the perceived lack of recognition, the absence of a gesture that would acknowledge his steadfast loyalty. He felt that his consistent goodness had gone unnoticed, while his brother's spectacular failure was now being rewarded with an extravagant party. But when "this son of yours" came, he spat out the words "this son of yours" with a distinct emphasis, distancing himself from his brother, refusing to acknowledge him as his own. "Who has devoured your property with prostitutes? You killed the fattened calf for him." The accusation of prostitutes might have been a rumor, or an assumption, or perhaps even a harsh truth, but in his anger, he painted the darkest possible picture of his brother's past, highlighting the perceived injustice of the situation. His words were sharp, cutting, designed to wound, to expose the perceived hypocrisy of his father's actions. The father listened patiently, his heart aching. He heard the pain in his elder son's voice, the deep-seated resentment that had been festering, perhaps for years. He understood the feeling of being overlooked, of seeing another receive what felt like unearned favor. But his perspective was different. He saw not a ledger of good deeds versus bad, but the profound joy of a son returned from the brink. "Son," the father replied, his voice gentle, filled with a quiet sorrow, "you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours." These words were meant to reassure, to remind his elder son of his secure and privileged position within the household. The elder son had never left, had never been separated from the father's presence, from the abundance of the estate. Everything the father possessed, all the wealth, all the land, all the resources, was ultimately the elder son's inheritance, his by right and by unwavering presence. He had always been in a position of honor and authority, a co-manager of the family's affairs, a beloved and trusted heir. The father had never withheld anything from him. The father's words were a gentle rebuke, a quiet correction of his elder son's distorted perception. He was trying to open his son's eyes to the reality of his own blessings, to the constant, unwavering love and provision he had always enjoyed. The elder son had not needed a special feast to affirm his status, because his status had never been in question. He had always been with the Father, in continuous communion and shared life. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, the Father continued, his voice softening, for this your brother was dead, and is alive, he was lost, and is found. He reiterated the core reason for the celebration, attempting to shift his elder son's perspective from one of transactional justice to one of profound, life-affirming joy. He emphasized the word your brother, subtly urging his elder son to reclaim that familial bond, to see his returning sibling not as a rival or a source of shame, but as a beloved member of the family who had been restored. The father's words hung in the air, mingling with the distant sounds of the ongoing feast. The elder son stood there, still, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He heard his father's gentle reasoning, the quiet plea for understanding, the affirmation of his own secure place. But the deeply ingrained sense of injustice, the feeling of being wronged, was a powerful current running through him, making it difficult to fully absorb his father's perspective. He had always been the dutiful son, the one who stayed, who worked, who never asked for anything beyond what was expected. And now, this prodigal, this wastrel, was being celebrated as if he were a hero. The father's gaze, filled with a quiet longing, rested on his elder son. He yearned for both his children to understand the depth of his love, a love that extended to the steadfast and the wayward alike. A love that did not diminish for one when it embraced the other. He wanted his elder son to step out of the shadows of resentment and into the light of shared joy, to experience the profound happiness of a family made whole again. He waited, patiently, for his elder son to make a choice, to remain outside, nursing his bitterness, or to step across the threshold and join the celebration, to embrace his brother, and to partake in the overflowing joy of his father's heart. The choice was his, a silent decision hanging in the cool evening air, as the sounds of the feast continued, a symphony of restoration and unmerited grace. The aroma of roasting calf, of freshly baked bread, of sweet wine, drifted past them, inviting, beckoning. The stars began to prickle through the deepening twilight, silent witnesses to this quiet drama unfolding at the edge of the celebration, a poignant moment of choice, of understanding, of the enduring power of a father's love, a love that stretched out, endlessly, to both his sons, waiting for them to fully grasp the breadth and depth of its boundless embrace, a love that yearned for every lost child to come home, to be found, to be welcomed, to be celebrated, to be restored to their rightful place, within the warmth and safety of the family, under the watchful, loving gaze of a father who never stopped hoping, never stopped praying, never stopped looking down the dusty road for the faintest sign of a returning figure, a figure that would bring with it the promise of renewal, of forgiveness, of a peace that transcends all understanding, a peace that settles over the heart like the softest evening mist, calming every troubled thought, every lingering doubt, every shadow of regret, replacing it with the gentle glow of acceptance, of belonging, of a love that is as vast and as eternal as the night sky itself, stretching out beyond the visible horizon, beyond the reach of human comprehension, a love that simply is, always present, always available, always waiting, like the steady, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping household, the soft rustle of the olive leaves in the gentle breeze, the distant, comforting sound of a nightingale's song, weaving itself into the quiet tapestry of the night, a lullaby of unending grace and unwavering, unconditional love that stretched beyond the horizon, beyond the reach of any human folly, a love that simply was, like the ancient stones of the house, like the enduring stars above. Meanwhile, far from the familiar scent of his father's fields and the comforting murmur of his mother's voice, the younger son, having gathered all that belonged to him, had set off on a journey, his heart a strange mix of exhilaration and a nascent, unacknowledged unease. He had converted his portion of the inheritance, likely a substantial sum, perhaps a third of the family's movable wealth, as land typically remained with the eldest, into coin, a heavy pouch of silver and gold that clinked with each step, a sound that at first felt like freedom, like possibility, but which would, in time, begin to sound like a hollow echo in his increasingly empty pockets. He traveled eastward, perhaps towards the Decapolis, a region known for its Greek cities, its bustling markets, its more cosmopolitan, less traditional ways, a place where a young man with money and a desire for independence could easily lose himself in the vibrant, often superficial, currents of urban life. The roads he took were dusty, winding paths, sometimes paved with Roman precision, sometimes merely well-trodden tracks, flanked by olive groves and vineyards, by fields of wheat and barley, all familiar sights, yet seen through the lens of a new, untethered existence. The air grew warmer, perhaps drier, as he moved further from the cooler breezes of his homeland, the sun beating down with an intensity that promised adventure but also hinted at a certain harshness. He arrived in a distant country, a place where the dialect might have been subtly different, the customs a little foreign, the faces of the people less familiar, less welcoming than the faces of his own village. Here he plunged headlong into a life of extravagance, a whirlwind of fleeting pleasures that promised much but delivered little of lasting substance. The days blurred into a succession of banquets and revelries, the nights filled with the clinking of wine cups, the laughter of companions who were friends only to his coin, the soft, seductive strains of lyres and flutes that played tunes of forgetfulness. He spent his money freely, lavishly, on fine foods, perhaps roasted meats, rich stews spiced with exotic flavors, sweet dates and figs imported from afar, and on expensive wines, served in elegant amphorae, their ruby depths reflecting the flickering lamplight. He bought luxurious garments, perhaps dyed with Tyrian purple or woven with delicate patterns, shedding the simple, practical tunics of his farming life for the soft, flowing robes of a man of leisure. He frequented places of entertainment, perhaps chariot races in a nearby hippodrome, or theatrical performances in an open-air amphitheater, the roar of the crowd, the dramatic declamations of actors, all a heady distraction from the quiet voice of his conscience, which he tried desperately to silence. His companions were many at first, a glittering entourage drawn to the warmth of his generosity, their smiles as bright as the gold coins he so readily dispersed. They flattered him, praised his wit, admired his seemingly endless supply of wealth, their voices a chorus of approval that fed his youthful vanity. He felt important, powerful, the center of a universe he had created for himself, far from the watchful, knowing eyes of his father and the familiar rhythms of his village. The scent of expensive perfumes, the aroma of roasted lamb, the sweet, cloying smell of fermented grapes, the sound of boisterous laughter and light-hearted music, all mingled into an intoxicating haze that obscured the true nature of his choices. He lived as if the well of his inheritance would never run dry, as if the sun would always shine on his careless days, as if the laughter would never cease. But time, as it always does, marched on, and with each passing day, the heavy pouch grew lighter, the clink of coins less frequent, more hollow. The lavish meals became less frequent, the expensive wines replaced by cheaper alternatives, the fine garments beginning to show the wear of careless living. His companions, sensing the change, slowly, subtly, began to drift away, their smiles fading, their flattery